Good morning, Stonewall Farm, and good morning, Savory Hub. And I just want to say hooray. I'm so excited to be here today for the launch of the Savory Hub. Let's really give that a give. I'm really saying this from the bottom of my heart because I absolutely believe it. I think this is essential for the future of humanity. And Alan nails it on the head when he says, we have no choice. We have to restore the world's grasslands, and that is the only hope for civilization as we know it. So I was just introduced, I'm representing Soil for Climate today. It's a nonprofit organization that advocates for soil as a climate solution. I'm here with my colleague Carl, and we recognize the essential role of grasslands restoration in mitigating global warming and creating a safe future for everyone. And our background is unlike the climate side, sort of like, the science techie side, not really like the farming side of things. And I was what you might call a traditional climate activist. And the first phase of that was simply acknowledging that climate is a problem. And then it was about technology, less emissions, better cars, solar panels, windmills, higher R-value insulation, all of that, right? Reducing the emissions. But then in 2009, a seminal paper came out from Susan Solomon at MIT. The actual title of the paper was Irreversible Climate Change Due to Carbon Dioxide Emissions. Irreversible. This was in 2009. She said that the warming would increase for 1,000 years even after emissions stopped. The warming will still, it's not just going to stay at the temperature it's at, it will still continue to get more warm for 1,000 years even after emissions stop, and that's just when she stopped running the computer program, right? Like it probably would go on for more. And 4 years later, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, said a large fraction of anthropogenic climate change resulting from CO2 emissions is irreversible, so they're clearly borrowing her language, on a multi-century to millennial time scale, except in the case of a large net removal of CO2 from the atmosphere over a sustained period. Except in the case of a large net removal of CO2 from the atmosphere over a sustained period. Okay, where's the carbon gonna go?
In the soil.
In the soil. That's it. That is the only place it's gonna go. It can't stay in the atmosphere. It can't dissolve in the oceans where it becomes carbonic acid, which destroys the coral reefs. It has to go in the soil. Okay, so this is literally like a physics chemistry problem. It's there, it has to go there. And how's it gonna get there? It's gonna get there with the restoration of grasslands, and grasslands need ruminants, and it needs lots of ruminants, and it needs them to behave in a way that they co-evolved with. Now, just really quickly in terms of the big picture, excuse me one moment. What we're really talking about here is literally the evolution of humanity. Humanity is a grassland co-evolved species. We literally co-evolved with ruminants and grasslands. That's when we technically became human, or humans, and not just primates. And in terms of the big picture, in terms of sort of the paleoclimate picture, 35 million years ago, when grasslands first started to evolve and became a dominant ecosystem, there was about 600 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. Okay, that's twice what it should be or what we evolved for. And the temperatures were like 4 to 5 degrees C warmer than they are now. It was a completely different world. It was a hothouse world. There was no polar caps, okay? When grasslands began to evolve and ruminants and ungulates and herbivores became dominant species on the planet, that is what pulled the carbon out of the air and put it in the soils, and it literally created what's called a different climate regime. We're in a totally different sort of regime now in terms of the planetary climate behavior than it was 35 million years ago before the evolution of grasslands. Grasslands is what made that possible. And about 6 million years ago, a new type of grass called a C4 grass evolved. So there's something called C3 and C4 photosynthesis. It basically means it has 4 carbon molecules are oxidized in the photosynthetic process. And it's much more efficient in terms of its use of water. This is what allowed grasslands to evolve in the tropical and subtropical regions. That's when they started to really expand, which pushed on forests, and guess what? That's when human evolution started, because that's when there was too much pressure in forests for primates and protein, and all this protein was in the grasslands, and some primates were on the border, literally looking out into the grassland from the forest and said, you know what, there's a lot of animal out there, there's a lot of protein out there, we're just going to continue looking for grubs forever, we're going to go out on the plains. And that's literally how humanity started. It was the quest for protein out of the plains, because the forests were shrinking, because grasslands were expanding, and they started eating protein, and guess what? The frontal lobe started to expand, we got higher order thinking, we got planning, we got language, and what do you think the very first conversation was? What were the first words mentioned? Where's the beef? So there you have it. It's literally the story of evolution, and it's still going on. We are still having that conversation. How are we managing carbon? How are we managing grasslands? How are we managing protein? How are we managing our society on this planet? And in a month, there's a talk in Ottawa called The Future of Protein. And I'm going to be talking about it, and you can imagine what I'm going to say. So anyway, all of that is just sort of prelude to the big picture. We're going to get down to sort of New England and practical policy-like stuff. But so one of the panelists is Red Shin, and he has a company now called Big Picture Beef, and he'll be sourcing from New England, or from the Northeast. And, but he said to me the other day, he said something fascinating. He said, give me Iowa, Indiana, and Illinois, and I'll change the weather. Okay? And I began thinking about that, and if you look at where the tall grass prairie used to be, hello, that's where 12 feet of carbon-rich soil was. You really will change the weather. It's not just hyperbole. You really will change the weather. If you restore the tall grass prairie, you'll bring down 100 gigatons of carbon out of the atmosphere. You'll change the parts per million. You'll change the reflectivity. You'll change the water, the winds, everything. You will, in fact, change the weather. That's not just hyperbole. That's a fact. But he doesn't have Iowa. He has the Northeast. So we're going to start in the Northeast, but eventually we need to go to the world. So thank you. Those are my introductory remarks.